it's a testing centre as well. You look at Arsenal with their incredible foundation, the work they're doing. Manchester United and Manchester City were immediately involved in food banks as well. So I think, whether it's supporters initiatives, which we know how sort of good they are and how embedded in the community the fans are, but actually if you look at the clubs are so involved as well. I mean, just coming back to Chelsea, they've got involved with Refuge UK, just helping them financially and spreading awareness that there's likely to be, as there has been, a spike in figures of domestic abuse. So look, I think we should have a nod to the clubs for the work they've been doing, and also the players as well, the Players Together initiative. You look at the work that Jordan Henderson and Kevin De Bruyne and Bellerin and individuals like that have been doing, as well as the stuff that they've been doing privately as well. So listen, sort of football, we focus on all the money, but I think we should also give a nod to the amazing good initiatives privately and publicly that the clubs and the players are doing.
Yeah, I do think that the Players Together, I think, was a wonderful initiative. It answered back also, I think, some of the criticism, which I think was incredibly unfairly and levelled at the players' door, frankly, that at a time when pay cuts and deferrals were being talked about. The notion then that players were being selfish and greedy, frankly, is just a lot of the players, I think, they don't seek credit or praise for some of the stuff that they do. I mean, for some of the overseas players, they've given generously to Players Together, for example, from a domestic point of view towards the NHS charities. But obviously, if you're a foreign player, I think your natural instinct is to also try and seek out and help at home. I mean, and many of these players are almost giving sort of kind of 3 times over, if you like. They're giving some money back to the club, and it is their money, I think, in wage cuts and deferrals. They're giving money towards the Players Together, and they're also sending money back for charities closer to home. I think that, the generosity, I think, from the players, I think is overlooked. And I think fair play to some of them and I understand the arguments about not wanting to get into particularly into pay cuts, because they would rather give their money to sort of charities than back to their own clubs. And it's a very, very fair argument, and it's something that's put forward by the PFA. But it's football all levels. I mean, Roman Abramovich has been outstanding on this. I mean, he's a Russian billionaire who, frankly, when he arrived in this country, wasn't given a particularly warm welcome. But the work that he and Chelsea have done has been remarkable, putting a few English billionaires to shame, let me tell you. And then it's clubs across the board in Premier League level, from Arsenal, from Man City to Man United doing wonderful things. Look at what Leeds are doing. Look at what Portsmouth, and I was alerted this week to something, that Middlesbrough are doing. And absolutely across the board at all levels, football clubs are playing their part in community. And that shows, I think, why football is so important to our life, why football is beyond just sport, and why I think it deserves respect and support at this time, because football together makes such a difference, such an impact on a community and society level.
On that note, John, I ought to give a little shout out to our very own Alan Smith, who today has taken up the 2.6 challenge. I think you can see there he's washing 26 cars in St Albans to raise money for charity. I think you've got a glimpse there. I mean, that is Smudger in his shorts, which is an alarming sight at the best of times. So, well done, Smudge. Good luck with that. Martin, John touched on it there. How delicate or otherwise do you think negotiations have been and between clubs and players, the difference between deferrals and pay cuts? What have you made of that scenario?
Well, from the very start, the PFA were not particularly helpful. The Premier League mismanaged the whole issue, so it's just broken down in discussions about trust and about whether you trust people. And the PFA want everyone to open their books, which I mean, you pay good money for irony like that over the West End, but some of the clubs have agreed, and there's unity. I think a lot of it depends on the strength of the leaders in your dressing room. I don't think it was a great coincidence that Mark Noble managed to persuade the West Ham dressing room to take the deferral. And then at Arsenal, you've got huge divisions with people like Mesut Ozil and other players in the dressing room apparently not agreeing with the rest of the players. So I think a lot of it is to do with leadership. A lot of it is to do with the individuals you've got, with having strong individuals in your dressing room and being able to see both sides. I find it quite strange. I really did think that all players would just go, we've been very generously treated here. We're very generously paid. We can see your point of view. I thought that would happen. I thought that would happen a lot swifter than it has done.
Now, I know that, we don't actually know the truth of exactly what the situation at Arsenal is in terms of who has agreed and who hasn't. I know Mesut Ozil's name has been highlighted, but the accuracy of that I'm not entirely certain of. But, John, it's a club you know well. What are you hearing in terms of the negotiations happening there?
Yeah, look, I feel really passionate about this. I think, it's a story that I've obviously written. I think immediately people think, oh, you're being critical. I'm really not. I think that basically, Hector Bellerin is the PFA, and I actually think he's a very, very good voice. He's a very respected voice amongst them. But there you have some players, and, even up until the start of last weekend, I think you had 7 players who didn't particularly want to accept the 12.5% pay cut that Arsenal were proposing. Mesut Ozil is a strong-willed player, an individual, and I actually think that he is incredibly generous, I think, in his donations. And I think it's his right, his prerogative to say, I might do it further down the line, which I understand he has done. I might take a pay cut further down the line. I might do a deferral further down the line. I would like to see, bearing in mind that basically the PFA have urged players not to take pay cuts. They're of the mind that sort of kind of it's a deferral. And Arsenal could save £25 million for this. Well, it basically, that goes back into the club unless they've qualified for the Champions League. So you could argue that basically the £12.5 million that basically that the government misses out on there because of, that's what the players would therefore be paying in tax is a very valid argument, perhaps for not taking a pay cut, because then that goes back into the NHS. I can't stress enough that someone like Ozil, look at what he does worldwide. I mean, there's no issue there about a generosity aspect. He's incredibly generous. And I think that goes for so many players. And I think that when you find time and again that basically if there's a discussion or debate to be had at any Premier League club, it's not about greed. It's about wanting to give that money back rather than to their football club, but back to society. And I think that that's something that should be respected. Listen, ideally, of course, you don't have a unified dressing room. I feel really strongly that basically a lot of these players who are sort of resisting pay cuts, the reason they're doing it is because they want to give their money, and it is their money, generously to the causes that they support. And I applaud them for doing so. And we should actually respect that.
The NHS have never had more money than they've got at the moment. That's all you'd argue with that, is that the NHS has never had more money being thrown at it than it has at the moment. And actually, it's got a massive bureaucracy that makes that very, very hard to spend. When the NHS will need money is when the reckoning comes at the end of all this, when the coronavirus bill kicks in. You've got £83 billion set aside in the NHS to fight lawsuits, for instance, with people suing them all the time. And they will do it over coronavirus because those first lawsuits are beginning to arrive in other countries already. They're beginning to arrive in Italy. People are suing the health service. So that's when the NHS are going to need money. So I understand it's all wonderful that everyone wants to give to the NHS. Actually, it's the players, it's the clubs that are actually have got a problem, and it's a temporary problem, one would hope, solved by temporary deferrals. And that's what I don't understand. So I say, they're giving to the NHS, which is fantastic, marvellous. Time to give to the NHS, give it 12 months. That's when they'll really, really need the money, because that's when the reckoning is coming. The next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. That's when the coronavirus reckoning is coming. And will it all still exist then? Will people still be given 30% of their wages then? Probably not, because this is the moment now, and everyone is steering it towards the NHS, when actually it's the clubs whose need is greatest. I'm not saying every club, but certainly you look at clubs in the Championship, you look at clubs below the Championship. That is a real great need at the moment.
It's also about the spirit and the unity of a club. If you are on the non-football playing staff at a club and you are suffering, even if you haven't been furloughed, even if your own sort of wages haven't been cut, everyone is suffering out there. You actually want to know that the real stars of the club are actually taking the initiative internally in terms of deferrals, as Martin was saying. We understand how much amazing work that the players do initially, and we've discussed that. And Mesut, I think it's slightly unfair that he's been singled out, because as Crossley says, he does a remarkable amount of work with his charities sort of out with the UK, as well as some within the UK. But I do think that in terms of the spirit at the club, spirit at the training ground, everyone has to be on board with this. And as Martin was saying about sort of Mark Noble, the fact that the staff at West Ham will be able to look at the players in the West Ham dressing room and say, right, you stood shoulder to shoulder with us in this difficult time.
Very, very quickly, Henry, your thoughts. Do you think another reason for players resisting pay cuts, the back of their minds and think, OK, we take a pay cut now, but come the opening of the transfer window, our club could well bid 100 million or whatever for a new player, and that doesn't sit right with them?
Well, I think all the headlines about Jadon Sancho going for 100 million, Harry Kane going for 200 million. I mean, first, let's have a reality check in terms of, as Ed Woodward was indicating, in terms of what the shape the transfer market is going to be in when football finally returns. I think there will be a backlash against big fees. I think there will be an issue with wages as well. So absolutely, and I imagine the players also looking at the money that these actually have at home, that they have. These are incredibly wealthy individuals. But absolutely, in terms of camaraderie, in terms of collectivity, and in terms of doing the right thing, there should be deferrals.
OK, we have to take a break right now, but afterwards we'll be discussing, well, a topic that's already garnered a huge amount of debate, and that is the potential takeover of Newcastle United. Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement. As we said, there may be no football right now, but there is plenty to write about. And I don't think there is any hotter topic in terms of a takeover than Newcastle United, mainly down to the Saudi Arabian element of the potential takeover. Martin, what's your take on this? And also, do you think there will be any appetite whatsoever from either government or indeed Premier League to step in? Or indeed, should there be?
Well, government, absolutely not. You cannot trade with Saudi Arabia, be in business in alliances with Saudi Arabia, and then expect Newcastle to football them into submission. So government, no. Premier League, no. They like the narrative. They like new money coming into the game. So I don't see any official objection to it whatsoever. My own personal position on it was that I was very sceptical at the start, because there's been so many near misses with Newcastle takeovers where the money's mysteriously not been there, or the person just sort of disappeared in the mist when it came to it. So I began from a sceptical position. I think this one's genuine. I think this one goes through. I think it works as a business proposition. They'll be able to do once they're in there, however, is a completely different thing, because I know the Newcastle fans will be expecting a massive influx of money, and there will be more money in the club, in the facilities of the club, in the structure of the club, and more money in the transfer market as well. But the financial fair play rules are there to stop owner investment, and Newcastle will find it very, very difficult to get around those rules. as Manchester City are finding it very, very difficult to put their money into the club, as any new owner finds it difficult to put the money in, because what we seem to like in football is people taking money out of football. They don't like putting money in for some reason. All the rules are there to stop you putting money in, but you can take plenty out. So that's what it's there for. And I do fear that Newcastle, the fans will be delighted because they've got rid of Mike Ashley. So they will be delighted by that. But in terms of being able to grow the club and making a short-term impact on those elite teams, I think it could be quite frustrating for the owners as well.
Henry, Martin has addressed the side in terms of, or the government position in terms of the Saudi Arabian involvement. Of course, there's a huge amount of historical trade between the two countries anyway. But is there potentially more? What are you hearing in terms of the number of other stakeholders in the Premier League objecting because of what has happened in the Middle East in terms of beIN Sport and their output being hijacked by Saudi Arabia and losing huge amounts of money? Well,
that will be a bigger issue for football, which doesn't have too big a moral compass. The bigger issue, broadcast rights, not human rights, I think, when it comes down to it. Look, there's very much two sort of narratives at play here. First, the desire amongst Newcastle United fans to effectively to have a liberation after the occupation of Mike Ashley, of their great club for 13 years. It's been a very cold, sterile experience, even as an outsider, to go up there, and someone who has great affinity to the club like I do, and just sort of talk to the supporters there. You could just see how much they were hating the joylessness of the Mike Ashley era, that things that he stands for is completely antithetical to Newcastle, which is just that chance to dream. I mean, Newcastle fans are not stupid. They're not expecting to win the Champions League. They're not expecting really to win the league, but they want a chance. They want some hope that they can actually see pride in the shirt, see attacking football, see that, the likes of, another Ginola, another Shearer, players like that who wore the shirt with pride playing for them again. But they've got some decent players now, but it's a very under-resourced squad. So I can see, I've read a lot of pieces about Newcastle United fans and what their desire for this takeover, this desire to get rid of Mike Ashley. And I think people who write these papers, and I see a lot of comments on social media, go to Newcastle, spend time with the Newcastle United fans, have actually experienced what's happened in Newcastle during this 13-year occupation by Mike Ashley of their club. And I think you'll understand why the Newcastle fans are so keen to move Mike Ashley out. Now, there's the next issue is, are the Saudis the right owners for the club? Personally, and I've been talking to them, there are a couple of strong American bids who one with strong sporting connections and one an incredibly wealthy individual, even by American standards, very wealthy individual. But obviously in this period of exclusivity, they cannot move. So I agree with Martin. I think it will be weighed through. The government certainly aren't going to get involved. You might have one or two politicians piping up and saying it's wrong. But then, if as a country, we're selling so much in military aid. This is military aid. It's not even humanitarian aid we're necessarily sending to Saudi Arabia. I don't think the government will get involved. The Premier League, as Martin says,